Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, February 5th, 2024. Time for another week, another show. We're well into February at this point. Groundhog Day is over. And somehow we're back here on a Monday with primary election results. South Carolina, without my knowledge and without my permission, went ahead with a primary over the weekend, which is actually a good thing. Gives more people a chance to vote, although honestly, at this point, everybody should just be voting early anyway at their own convenience. And, well, some states make that harder than others. But here we are with results from South Carolina, which I don't think we're ever in doubt. So, you know, already the reporters covering this as though the primaries are over. And I guess essentially they really are. No sense that anybody appears ready to upset the apple cart in terms of the inevitability of the two nominations. I mean, it's essentially for each of the parties as if an incumbent were running for re-election. And, of course, for the Democratic Party, that is actually true. And for the Republican Party, that is actually not true, but they believe it is true. And here we go. Okay, so South Carolina, that is Nikki Haley's home state, and it doesn't make a damn bit of difference. So we have that going for us, which is fun and nice to analyze. And other than that, I think, let's see, morning chatter. I mean, because that happened on Saturday, everybody got their chatter out of them on Sunday. Yeah, actually, it was pretty much over with the chatter on Saturday night. And then, I don't know, I guess, are we outraged about the Grammys, possibly? I think there's a little bit of that going on out there. That is certainly something that I had no idea of what was going on. I mean, I got the sense that it was happening, as I noticed in social media. Everybody's saying, I can't believe this one or that one won or did not win the Grammy as appropriate. But we'll see if we can catch up on that information. And more writing, like pouring out of people over the 14th Amendment situation as we hurtle towards hearing date for that one in the Supreme Court. We could do a whole week just on people, all, various columnists coming to the realization that the thing somebody else said was 99% of the way there on what I feel about the 14th Amendment arguments, but there's an additional 1%. Or I just haven't had a chance to repeat the argument that someone else made. Some great amicus briefs, more than one amicus brief written by historians now. I guess other historians saw that there was an opportunity to I missed my chance to get onto this amicus brief. I'll write a different one, some of them with a different focus, and literally could spend a week reading through all those things, and we might just do it. But that's not the only thing on the agenda for today. Many other things to catch up with. That's Greg Dworkin's Monday task as he rounds up the weekends. Let's see. I'm just checking over what Justice has to say here. Oh, Tucker Carlson is in Moscow. That's interesting. I did happen to notice that via social media yesterday, and, I didn't look any further into it, honestly. But whatever. I mean, I guess he's got the ability to do that. And that's no longer taboo, of course. It used to be not that long ago. I guess if right-wingers like Tucker Carlson found out that someone they considered left-wing was visiting Moscow, that was a nonstop story forever and ever because they were obviously communist, whereas now, I guess because they're merely kleptocratic over there now and oligarchic rather than communist per se, it's a great thing, and everybody should go over there. As the senators are going there, Republicans of all stripes, now Tucker Carlson. Oh, I just realized we'll get to it because, honestly, that's what Greg is here to do, round these things up. I know what stories are coming, and I haven't even looked at the raft yet. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Good morning.
I'm
the raft
predicting
is
the whole
keeping
thing.
you afloat this fine Monday morning.
Yes, always. Okay, and okay. Well, I forget what I was going to jump to, but I'm sure it's on the list. And now I'll spend the next 10 minutes saying, "What was that thing again?"
And if it's not,
Right. Well, maybe tomorrow I'll remember.
Maybe.
Okay.
Or maybe you already covered it.
Fleeting moments. Yeah. Oh, should be. I probably should be getting an Emmy for that or something. What would we get?
I am
Nothing.
almost a nearly
Potty.
70-year-old white dude.
There you go.
And I don't claim to have a spot in explaining to people what's going on with the music awards.
Oh, no chance for me.
But
yeah,
I don't watch it, but I saw clips. And the clip
that's
I saw
enough. Yes.
was Tracy Chapman and Luke Combs with a fantastic duet of Tracy's song.
That's what's going on.
Fast Car, which she won Grammys for back in the 80s.
Yeah.
Late
And then they
80s.
did it again.
Well, Luke Combs covered it,
All right.
but in country style, which is not how she wrote it.
Fast truck, I assume.
Yeah, right? Fast Convoy. So Luke Combs won Country Music Awards for it and then was nominated for a Grammy, didn't win, but was one of the performers on stage live with Tracy Chapman. So they did a duet together. It was absolutely fantastic. And all sorts of commentary could go with it, how a very private black queer woman songwriter could never win a country award unless a white dude sang it for her, which he did. But he is so respectful of her. It was so clear, not only in the way they sang together, but also comments he made before and after, and the little, bow he did at the end of the piece that they did together. He clearly said, look, this is just a perfect song. She wrote it. She's responsible for it. I just sing it. She's great. And so that was wonderful to see.
Well, that's nice. Yeah, that's good messaging. He's on point. He gets to do it as a musician, do what other musicians do, and show that he's no different from the rest there in appreciation
well, not
of
just
the
other
songwriting.
musicians, not just him. This was the music awards, so you had a whole bunch of musicians there, including dare I say somebody you might have heard of, Jonathan Swift, the satirist, who apparently is dating a Kansas
Taylor
City.
Swift.
Oh, wait, not that Swift. It's the other Swift. It's Taylor.
I
Swift.
thought he was dating her. Okay, Jonathan Swift is dating Taylor
Swift. She's there in the audience
Tom
singing
Swift.
along and dancing to Fast Car as they're singing it, as are many of the other artists there. It was just a thing. It was wonderful.
I assume this means someone is outraged, but I'm not sure who.
I don't know about that, but, it's just a
Taylor
great
Swift
piece.
danced, so...
Now, Taylor Swift herself, of course, is a political controversy because, she's out of Tennessee and is not the Aryan Great White Hope that MAGA hoped she would be. But she won for her album, and, it was all wonderful. It was all good.
All right. Well, lots of people getting lots of awards. It's fun. It's generally...
Joni Mitchell was there. She sang, both sides now from the perspective of somebody who's been through everything. And as they pointed out in the intro to her piece, she had to learn to walk 3 times.
Oh.
Once as a baby, once when she got polio, and once after a stroke. So...
Well,
the fact that she's performing at all is a miracle.
Yes.
And, she brought some, shall we say, depth.
We can.
That is just interesting in the writing. These are artists who wrote things. And, Joni Mitchell arguably should win a Nobel just like, what's his name? Bob Dylan did.
Oh, okay.
For her poetry, for her work.
Why not cross over?
Why not?
All right.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So
big
with
award
all
night.
of that, let's talk about politics.
All right.
Not Taylor Swift politics.
Sing about
There's really
it.
not much to talk about that. I can't get too outraged about Taylor Swift.
Okay.
Let's
No
talk
intention.
about some things that happened. I think one of the things that happened, of course, is, and we're going to talk a lot about, I think, is the immigration bill.
All right. It didn't happen yet, but it's starting to happen.
The text came out. The
Okay.
fact that there was an agreement between Langford and Sinema and Chris Murphy, in and of itself, these days, in partisan politics is an achievement. And to set the stage, let's just be clear about this.
No small thing to get Langford. All right.
Jim Langford is an old-fashioned conservative.
Yes.
He's there to try to push conservative things, but the way he does it is to try to negotiate and compromise with Democrats because that's the only way to get things done. He's really into that.
They're half the government.
Yeah, or as Liam Donovan said, it's really quaint and it's really sort of adorable, but that's not where the party is.
Yeah.
That's true. The party is into blocking every possible thing from happening. And so what happens is they come up with something, and of course there's lots of compromise on the Democratic side, which Democrats, of course, are going to wring their hands about. And there's lots of compromise on the Republican side. They don't wring their hands. They just demand that you give them even more. And they're really not interested in a solution. They want the issue. So that's just like so totally crystal clear that that's what they want. It isn't just Trump. It's the whole MAGA wing of the party. So therefore, Mike Johnson, the speaker, you may not know who he is, but he happens to be Speaker of the House.
I've heard of that guy.
And Steve Scalise, who was majority leader, is actually responsible for scheduling what comes to the floor.
Right.
Both did a Gandalf at the bridge and said, "This shall not pass."
Okay.
And tried to stop the Balrog in its tracks. The move from the House is to try to kill it in the Senate so that they don't have to deal with it. Because if it actually would pass the Senate, and that's not clear, but if it does, there's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure on the Republicans, political pressure, to do something with it because it's so clear, and Biden is already doing it, is running on, look, you say it's a problem, you say it's a crisis, we came up with a solution. It's not one everybody loves, but it does a whole lot of things. It's a compromise. Ask Jim Langford. Mm-hmm. Right? And what are you doing? You're saying, I don't want to compromise.
Right.
We gave you everything you were asking for the past decade. And you're saying, well, I don't want that. I want the issue. So let's be clear. That's the politics. And he's going to run on that. And we'll see how that goes.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, we'll see how that goes a week from tomorrow.
Oh. Who comes next?
The George Santos race.
Oh, okay.
And just like with Caravans and Gillespie versus Terry McAuliffe in round one, in Rocky 1, the issue in that district is going to be immigration.
Yes.
A lot of the people who were sent up from Texas wound up in New York, and some of them settled in that district, so it's a hot topic.
Okay. Republicans
are convinced it'll win them the seat. Democrats are nervous about it because Democrats are nervous, so we'll see what happens. But both sides are making it an issue. Democrats are making the issue of, here's the solution. Republicans are blocking it, elect me so we can get stuff done. And Republicans are making an issue of, you can't elect Democrats because they're just letting invaders in.
Yeah, enlightened. Very nice. Okay. Well,
so,
that's all they got.
That issue has legs, or whether, like the Gillespie Caravan stuff, it's things that Republicans persuaded reporters was important, and it turned out voters didn't really think so. We'll see. We'll see in a week.
It will be interesting. Okay.
Every day.
It's not a primary, but it still happens on Tuesday.
Right. So there's that. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about the should I do Taylor Swift? No, I'm not going to do Taylor Swift right now. Let's do a little bit more on this immigration bill. Chris Murphy has a really interesting thread on it. Remember, he's the Democratic liberal negotiator. Who's pretty clear. We didn't get everything we wanted. We got a lot of what we didn't want, but here he says, it's easy to scream close the border and just view this issue as a permanent political weapon instead of a problem to actually solve. But regular people want us to solve problems, not just tweet about them. So here's what we did. We got a bipartisan border reform deal. And minutes ago, he wrote this last night. Okay. The text of the bipartisan national security funding bill was released. It funds Ukraine. It funds Israel. It funds humanitarian relief, including for Gaza. Secures our border, reforms our asylum law, and as the co-author, here's a thread on the key elements. First, it's easy to just keep immigration and border policy as a political cudgel for another 40 years, but politics at its best is about finding bipartisan compromise, and that's what we've done here on the toughest issues. Here's a snapshot of what's in the bill. a quicker, fairer asylum process. No more 10-year wait. Claims processed in a non-detained, non-adversarial way in 6 months. And a slightly higher asylum screening standard at the border. One of the things they've done is taken it out of the courts and given it to, Homeland Security. So that's one of the reasons why the waits will be shorter. Also, no more waiting for work permits. This is important. Most asylum seekers can work immediately.
Okay.
That's a big deal. That's something Democrats wanted. There's a lot in there that Democrats didn't want, but that's one thing Democrats wanted. A brand new right to legal representation for all immigrants. Remember when Trump denied lawyers to victims of the Muslim ban? Never again. And the first ever government paid for lawyers for young unaccompanied minors. Longstanding injustice righted.
Okay.
A requirement the president funnel asylum claims to the land ports of entry when more than 5,000 people cross a day. The border never closes, but claims must be processed at the ports. This allows for orderly, humane asylum processing system. But important checks on that power can only be used for a limited number of days per year. Sunsets in 3 years. Emergency cases that show up in between the ports still need to be accepted. The ports must process a minimum of 1,400 claims a day. You can't reduce the arrivals at the border without allowing for more legal immigration. So more visas, 50,000 extra employment and family reunification visas each year for the next 5 years. And a brand new visa category to allow non-citizens to visit family in the U.S. Now, a clarification of how humanitarian parole is used at the land borders, but no changes to the president's ability to bring embedded sponsored migrants to the program known as CNHV. That's Cuba, Nicaragua, Haiti, and Venezuela.
Okay.
A new pathway to citizenship for Afghan parolees. So Afghans who helped the U.S. actually now have a path to citizenship. It's another right wronged. Another wrong right. Righted.
Yes, that's correct. That's the way to say it.
Yeah. The citizen of H-1B holders, the children of H-1B holders, these kids are often currently subject to deportation when they become 21, so there's no age limit anymore. So that's fixed.
Okay, I hadn't even thought of that one. Okay.
There's a ton of stuff in here that are like administrative fixes that actually are helpful. The bill helps fix the border and reform our broken asylum system, but it doesn't deviate from the nation's core values. This is in his view. So what it didn't do is it didn't deal with, I don't think it dealt with DACA and Dreamers. And that was a Democratic aspect. They didn't get that.
Okay. I mean,
right. And then in addition to that, that's just the border stuff. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in there too. For example, $60 billion to support Ukraine, $14 billion in security assistance for Israel, $2.4 billion for Central Command so that they can deal with what's going on in the Red Sea, $10 billion in humanitarian assistance to provide food, water, shelter, medical care, and essential services to civilians in Gaza, the West Bank, Ukraine, and other populations caught in conflict areas, $4.8 billion to support regional partners in Indo-Pacific and to deter aggression by Chinese government, $2.3 billion separately from the military aid to continue support for Ukrainians displaced by Putin's war of aggression, and then these bipartisan border policy changes. So that's what's in the bill. It's a pretty meaty bill.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Compromises everywhere, both sides. And that's why Langford, Sinema, and McConnell, and Schumer, and Murphy are trying to sell this bill to their colleagues. Whether they succeed or not is unclear. Some of the Latino Democrats, two of them at least, from California and New Jersey, have said, I don't buy it just yet. One has said, fine, I'm in. The squad doesn't like it. MAGA doesn't like it, which, again, makes me step back and say, maybe this is a good bill.
Yeah. That's it's a possibility when MAGA gets upset about it. But I mean, they are upset about everything.
They're upset about everything. But what they don't want is see anything passed.
Right.
So, how much weight does McConnell have? Not nearly as much as he used to. Liam Donovan is right. That's not where the party is. But, is there enough? Well, we'll see. I think it's going to come to a vote as soon as Wednesday, probably Thursday.
Oh, all right.
Why Wednesday or Thursday? Apparently there's this rule It's not a law. It's a
There can't be
rule
rules. No.
that says that, when you bring on something like this, you need 72 hours to read it, and that includes any potential amendments. And that won't be printed until this afternoon, so that's when the clock starts. Okay. Schumer said Wednesday, but 72 hours makes it sound more like Thursday than Wednesday, but what do I know about Senate time?
Right.
It's different than Eastern time.
Yeah, they have their own rules about bills laying over, which is essentially an opportunity to read through it. It's something that Republicans and, well, depending on who's in the minority, in the House, they can't seem to get that nailed down. Everybody's always complaining they don't have time to read the bill.
Political scientist Matt Glassman had an interesting observation. He said, when House members say that I need time to study the bill, there are a handful, and I mean handful, like you can count them on your thumbs, number of people for which this is true.
Yes, I need time. It's often I need time for somebody else to read the bill.
The vast majority is I need time to see how the politics are going to, fall out before I commit myself.
Occasionally, yeah. And when they say they need time for someone to read the bill, one, it's staffer. And two, what I mean here is I need somebody to be able to have time to prepare a one-pager with bullet points on what they found when they read the bill. And then I'll
and
be able
one
to say
bullet point response from me.
Yes.
And until that's done, I'm not doing anything. Yeah. It's not like, listen, Chuck Grassley needs time to study the bill because he's an expert on what's in bills. He doesn't
Assume that not
somebody
happening.
Pointed out, Chuck Grassley knows what he heard as he's walking down the corridor. That's about his working knowledge of any bill.
Yeah, and I mean, there are so many of them going on, that's pretty much all the time anybody has for any of it. But you do have to do even that work. You have to hear from people and, all right, tell me what's going on.
Right.
How do we feel about that?
Now, the bill's going to be described as a crackdown. That's partly to help get it passed, but it's partly because it's true. So, this is Bloomberg and Steve Dennis writing.
Okay.
What is and isn't in the Senate bipartisan border security deal? Bill aims to shut border to most migrants, speed deportations. Crackdown would be accompanied by a boost to legal immigration. So that's why it's a compromise.
Okay.
Now, some conservative Republicans, he writes, and media outlets promoted caricatured versions of the emerging pieces of the compromise as it was being assembled. Negotiators, in turn, hotly disputed the assertions. The release of a bill text now makes clear what the compromise would do. Biden would have to immediately close much of the border to asylum seekers. Using sweeping new emergency authority, U.S. border officials would turn away migrants between official ports of entry except unaccompanied children and people fleeing torture and those who are otherwise qualified, as Chris Murphy laid out, by the way. The president will be required to activate the shutdown authority whenever average daily migrant arrivals hit $5,000 for a week, $5,000 for a week, or $8,500 on a single day. The border would have effectively been shut down if the bill had been in place, said Kirsten Sinema. The border would stay shut until migrant arrivals dropped to 75% of the trigger point. But it doesn't affect U.S. citizens, permanent residents, and foreigners with legitimate visas.
Okay.
Right. Now, conservatives are saying, that means that 5,000 undocumented migrants can come in every day. That's not what it says.
Oh. All right.
In fact, undocumented migrants would remain subject to current enforcement measures as well as new restrictions imposed in the bill, but there is an expedited asylum processing in addition to limiting asylum, billions for enforcement. And, again, I think discussed this on the show. Mike Johnson said, we don't need no stinking bill. Joe Biden could just do executive orders and do all this anyway. Well, Trump tried that, and they were all found to be illegal, so no, he can't.
But that doesn't mean you can't just do it over and over and over again anyway.
Right. Also, there's more legal immigration, as we mentioned. And then, of course, the Ukraine money, which is, by the way, key, although that's not going to be the domestic discussion. Right. So why is this happening? It's happening because Biden wants Ukraine to be funded.
Okay, I mean,
is that important? Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's allegedly so. It's been
allegedly so. So
discussion point for a long time. Yeah,
this is going to irk Democrats. But if you want to pass this compromise because you want Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and more money for the border and making it a political solution rather than a cudgel as an issue, You're going to have to compromise on stuff. And so if that also means calling this an immigration crackdown in order to get it passed, Democrats will use that language, and it's going to bother people.
Yes.
But this is Biden's approach to bilateral, bicameral, bipartisan stuff.
All of the bias.
And he's got a pretty good track record in getting it done that way. So, that's where it is.
All right. I mean, that does occasionally happen, and you're supposed to agree to sit around and get batted around the head and neck a little bit in exchange for a bill that hopefully isn't a total disaster for you, but it isn't everything you're asking for.
But gets you some stuff that you feel like you absolutely must have.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, it's a crackdown, and I'm against crackdown, so I'm angry about that. And then, it passed. All right.
Yeah, but it also brings in some much needed reforms, including the ability to get work permits, which is enormous.
Yeah, that sounds pretty big, honestly.
But you can't highlight that because that doesn't help it get passed.
I see. Yeah, right. Even though it's like a central issue.
Even though it's a central issue. By the way, Ukraine is really the key to the bill, but of course we're going to talk about the border.
Oh.
So already 2 of the 4 Latino Democrats, according to Playbook, are publicly opposing the deal. Alex Padilla, Democrat, California, saying it misses the mark. Senate stalwart Bob Menendez. Calling it unacceptable. Ruben Gallego says, I'm in.
Okay.
So
a mixed reaction. Yes, okay. I mean, there's
some room to maneuver there.
Yes, I guess so. And I don't know. I don't know what. There's no point, I don't think, in trying to analyze what's motivating Menendez. So, I mean, but that's probably where he would be even without the whole gold bar thing.
Well, I think that's the best analysis. So, again, we'll see what happens. Hard to game out. First, it has to pass the Senate. Then we can talk about what that means for the House.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. What a fine microphone it is.
We're doing some technical issues. With
sure, it picks up all sorts of things.
Yeah, washing machine.
Right,
Abby,
it's okay.
What's going on outside, all
right.
that sort of stuff.
I guess the
heavy breathing.
Sounds like sheets of tinfoil are a big thing in your house or something. I don't know what's going on. Wait, that's the big mystery sound.
I'm trying to.
What is that right there? That I heard that.
I'm trying to clean up chewing gum wrappers from my desk to make room for my coffee here.
Oh, okay. Well, let me hear a little bit of that.
So if it sounds like tinfoil, it is tinfoil.
Okay. Yeah, no, there's a sort of that tearing sound, like when you tear off a sheet every once in a while, and I can't figure out exactly what's going on because it can't be that much aluminum foil being used in the mornings all the time. Right. So I'll have to identify it. At one point when it happens, I'll just say, that, right there, what was that sound? And then I don't know. Maybe that's confidential. I should just ignore it. I'll continue to ignore it. Never mind. I'm not going to ask. Go ahead.
So getting back to this border bill here, Eric Swalwell says, I support more security at the border, more certainty at the border. That's what Biden is trying to achieve. Oh. He needs authorities in Congress to do that. And what we're seeing is that he's trying to govern and Republicans are trying to sabotage. So you can expect that that's going to be a key here. Ron Filipowski points out, usually, and this is a really interesting point here, usually House leadership won't bring something to the floor when they know they don't have the votes to pass it. In the case of the border bill, they won't bring it to the floor for the exact opposite reason. They know it'll pass easily with bipartisan support. That would be true if it's an up or down vote. Yeah. Which is to say you need one more than the opposition in order for it to pass. You need one more yes, one more yay than nay.
Right.
If you bring it up under suspension, however, you need 2/3.
Right. But then no one can amend it.
Yes. And so if Steve Scalise refuses to bring it to the floor, can you defeat the previous question and then add amendments, because that opens up the floor for amendments, and then use the entire bill as your amendment and then vote on that? That would be a majority vote. If you try to bring it up under suspension, you got to round up more votes, which are probably there. So leadership in the House is desperate to not even see it. They don't want to deal with this. So they're going to do everything possible to stir up trouble in the Senate to try to make senators tank the bill so that they don't have to deal with it. So,
I guess so.
The House and Senate love each other. Here's yet another different example.
Yeah. It occurs to me now, I'm thinking, they won't really have the opportunity. If Scalise doesn't want it on the floor, and
he's already announced he doesn't.
I assume then there's really no opportunity to defeat the previous question on the rule and amend things unless the opportunity is taken on another bill. Yeah, and then they bring something that they think is benign otherwise, and then you could defeat the previous question on the rule for some unrelated bill and offer an amended rule that allows
name all post offices after Donald Trump bill. You bring that to the floor, and then you have a question about defeating the previous rule, and then you add the entire Senate bill on the border and Ukraine as an amendment.
Yes,
and then you have a up or down vote where you need one more yay than nay. Is that how it would work?
That is how it would work, and I guess to be clear, I should say no one has ever done that successfully. Right. So it's just
not. But then again, they never had these Republicans to deal with.
Right. It's very rare to have members of any party consistently or repeatedly over a long period of time voting against rules that are brought up. It's very unusual for a member of the majority to vote against the rule for any bill that comes to the floor. Or it's very rare, certainly very rare for any of them to be defeated, the rules themselves. And
that happens all the time now.
Yes, now they do it fairly frequently, although they've still never lost a previous question motion on any of this. And then as soon as they see that the first time it's going to happen is imminent, they'll just close things down and pull the bill and say, never mind. But it's a thing you can do, but just like discharge petitions, you can have, if you just get a majority to sign the thing. For various reasons, people refuse to sign those things because it gets them in trouble with leadership worse than they're willing to do. And although the tool is always there, no one has ever really been successful using it. So that's it. That's actually less of a long shot, the discharge petition, than the idea of defeating the previous question on a totally different bill. But it can be done. I mean, when a majority really wants something to happen, it's not supposed to be able to block it by one or two people.
As Don Rumsfeld once said, you go with the Congress you have, not the Congress you wish you had. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of ways you'd rather this be done. Langford and Murphy are trying one of those ways.
Like
but
regular
that doesn't
order?
necessarily work in the House.
No. All right, but it's worth... this is the way you start these things, right? If the Senate manages to pass a compromise bill, then, all right, it's your turn, House. You don't want to? Well, tough luck. You asked for this job, not me.
Well, or you could pass your own version and then go to conference and work out, differences.
Absolutely.
That's still on the table. That's still allowed, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that might be their way of doing it too, right? For the House to say, well, we'll just pass an ultra MAGA version of an immigration bill and say that's our version, and we got to have a conference, and the conference is going to last until
everybody whose
December.
Surname is Menendez, and we'll just start there.
Yeah. There's all sorts of ways to do it.
Senators not excluded.
Just stretch it out until after the election and not actually finish it. So, okay, we'll see which one they choose. And, the Senate, though, we should have an answer. I guess they're saying this week. All right.
So, we'll see.
Filibusters and whatnot.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, this is a piece from CNN on the Democrats' scramble to stave off defeat and battle for Santos's House seat, pointing out that Suozzi is saying the race is very local. We don't want the president here. He's not popular here. And he's endured an onslaught of GOP attacks over immigration, forcing him to put out two ads defending himself as he tries to seize on the issue by promoting his own push for legislative action and support for the Senate bipartisan deal. That's where you flip the script on the Republicans and say, we have a solution. It's a tough one. It closes the border, and you guys are voting against it. Vote for me. I'll get stuff done. So, again, we get to see how that works.
All right. One test run.
Moving on. This is from a new news organization that has replaced the Messenger. Mark Caputo, by the way, has gone over to the Bulwark. This is one called Notice, Notus, not Notice.
Okay, like POTUS, but with an N.
Yeah, I don't know what it stands for. But
Nerd of the United States. I don't know.
You're on Notice,
yeah. Notice.
So
weird.
Turnout was low in South Carolina. Democrats say that's not the point. They put in more effort, covered more miles, and invested in more organizing to prove it was the right decision to move the South Carolina primary from 4th in the calendar to 1st this year.
Okay.
So the reason I mention this is Jonathan Martin, who's got a career these days of being wrong, has a piece about the real danger to Democrats is not no labels. It's Robert F. Kennedy and third parties, and he's got that in Politico. Just a reminder, Jonathan Martin also wrote about Joe Biden's big New Hampshire blunder, pushing Dean Phillips as the alternative. Now, you probably don't remember this because it was like a few days ago.
Yeah.
But in New Hampshire, Biden won with 63% in a write-in vote. He wasn't even running because it wasn't an officially sanctioned primary. Phillips couldn't get to 20. He finished with 19 point something. And then on Saturday, when they had their primary in South Carolina, the first official one, Biden got 96% of the South Carolina vote after Dean Phillips had tweeted, if Biden doesn't get 95 or more, he should be embarrassed.
Well, all right.
Well, he got 96.
I'll tell you what, Dean Phillips might be a good pundit. Maybe.
Wait. So we haven't gotten to Dean Phillips yet. I'm just still dealing with Biden.
Damn.
So Biden gets 96% of the South Carolina vote.
Yeah.
The turnout is low. The early vote for black voters is higher than normal. They've got at least 6,000 more people registered than ever voted before, even though South Carolina is not going blue in any way, shape, or form.
Good habits,
it's certainly a
though.
Good party-building exercise, and so they're happy about that. Marianne Williamson finishes second with something like 2.1.
Exciting for her.
And Dean Phillips finishes third behind her.
Yeah.
1.7, 1.8, something like that. He couldn't even get to 2. And he finished third.
But that's a big day for him.
So Joe Biden's big New Hampshire blunder pushing Dean Phillips, I don't see it.
Yeah, I don't. What does he even mean, pushing Dean Phillips? What is it? House up.
The big New Hampshire blunder is that Dean Phillips is going to come and do a Gene McCarthy and surprise him in New Hampshire, just like with LBJ. Don't you get it?
No, I did not get that.
No, I didn't get it either. And apparently New Hampshire didn't get it because that's not what happened.
Okay, well, that's so another thing that didn't happen. I'm also not aware of that.
So yesterday he put, forget no labels, Biden's third-party peril is on the left. And there are a lot of commentators who are saying, Biden's in big trouble because the NBC poll came out over the weekend and he fell a couple of points to Trump. And look at what happened in South Carolina. The turnout was terrible. That means like nobody's enthusiastic about Biden and nobody's going to vote for him. And of course, that's not what any of this means.
It does mean enthusiasms, however. But I mean, I don't know why anybody even tries to analyze.
Because you take your priors and you find what sort of information is out there and you repeat it as if it's wisdom and say, I'm just going by the facts, folks. That's how Nate Silver, analyzes things these days.
Bizarre.
It's not very attractive, and it doesn't work.
Yeah. I mean, like, quite honestly, right. Oh, there was low turnout at
look, they've never done this before. This is the first time that South Carolina went first. It's the first time it was a primary where the incumbent was running and they actually let it happen. Yeah. They often cancel primaries when that's the case. At least they do in South Carolina.
Oh.
So all of this is like new. So what are you comparing it to?
I don't know. I was just going to compare
competitive race where there wasn't an incumbent. Well, how can you do that? Well,
you can't.
We will.
I mean, later it will be different. But yeah, I mean, there was low turnout on Saturday when there was really no contest going on. Let's compare that to turnout on Sunday where there was also no contest going on. I mean, there's no real competitors in the primary, and everybody knows it. And how many people are going to go to the polls when there's no contest going on? Well, you should compare that to another time when there's no contest going on. 0 people went to the polls today, so huge turnout on Saturday compared to today when there was also no contest.
So 2 polling comments. One of them is from Logan Phillips. This is in the Pundit Roundup, who tweeted, "Look, I know I track polling and forecast elections for a living. Race to the White House, that's what he does. Mm-hmm. But folks, give yourself a break. Living and dying by the polls every day is going to make your life far too painful." And The Economist writes,
probably true. Yes.
Trump lead over Biden may be smaller than it looks. Consider only the highest quality polls and the Republicans' advantage melts away. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you the graph that points that out. And there it is.
That's the sound of a graph coming through.
Yeah. So if you have an unranked by 538 poll, Trump's got like a 6-point lead.
Okay.
The pretty good polls, Trump's got a 2.4 lead. The very good polls is ranked by 538. Trump's got a 0.15 lead. And there's 13 of those.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's
so most polls released, by contrast, have come from pollsters middle class, firms with good but not exceptional records. Polls in the good and decent tier show Mr. Trump with a 2.4 lead and a 1.7 point lead, respectively. Meanwhile, pollsters with a poor record or no prior published results show Trump, ahead by more.
Well, yeah. I mean, who knows what they're doing? If you can forge electoral votes, you can forge a poll.
We've been through this with Rasmussen and with Trafalgar and other people you never heard of all of a sudden popping up saying, "Oh, look, Trump's going to win. Trump's going to win. Red wave." And the pundits and the reporters are so poll-driven, like you can't even talk to them about that. That's not what it shows. Oh, yeah, well, look at this average. Trump's ahead by 1.7. That's like, have you ever heard of margin of error? I mean,
or you realize that it's not a national
vote. GOP never leads in these polls. Well, of course they do. Didn't you follow Bush Gore? Bush was leading Gore by like 3 points, and it wouldn't budge, and it was really frustrating.
No, I didn't see that. I don't know. I mean, I guess you could just say that. I never heard of that.
Yeah, well, I need to study it before I answer. I'll have to have my staff tell you how I voted.
Maybe.
That was my favorite. Did you see that one? The clip of the Republican congresswoman in Florida being interviewed by the local Florida reporter.
Yeah,
I brought
didn't see the clip. I heard it.
$400 million to my constituency here. And the reporter said, "But wait a minute, you voted against that bill."
Sure.
Well, I don't know how I voted. I have to get back to you when my staff tells me how I voted. I don't remember, but I bring money in. That's the important thing. Well, how can you claim to bring money, said the reporter, when you voted against these bills? You voted against these bills. Well, I don't know that. I haven't checked
around when money showed up. So, yeah.
This is one of the most important bills of the Congress, the reporter said. How could you not remember how you voted on it?
Yeah, I don't know. But I think that I'm pretty sure that the follow-up to that really could have been, I have to check with my staff how I voted on it. No, you don't. I know how you voted on it because I know how all Republicans voted on it because you voted no as a block. Are you a Republican? That's the answer. That's how you voted. It was a no. don't check. It's not an individual record for you. You didn't vote as an individual on that. You voted as a party. You were told to vote no. You did it, and that's the answer. No one needs to check the record. Republican voted no on that bill. Thank you.
So this is from USA Today, and it's a look back at the South Carolina primary.
Oh.
3 takeaways from Biden's blowout win in the South Carolina Democratic primary.
3.
And quotes a interview with Pam Joy, a black 62-year-old waitress from Charleston, who sat out the primary.
I guess that's a takeaway. All right, I see what you mean.
For Biden in November, despite her concerns about his age, because she votes for Democrats.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's efficient use of her time. Right. She should have voted early, whatever, but okay.
Voter turnout Saturday, not surprisingly, decreased dramatically from the highly competitive open Democratic primary of 2020, which Biden also won.
Well, yes, it was competitive, you see.
Only 24% of the 2020 turnout, but Michael Tyler, communications director for the Biden campaign, said black voters made up approximately 76% of the early vote in South Carolina compared to 56% in 2020. So he mobilized that constituency. Betty Manigault, a retired nursing assistant who's black, said she voted for Biden because he's a godly man. She said there's no doubt in her mind Biden would win the primary, but felt it was important for her to vote. My ancestors died for me to get this right to vote. As she sat at a table selling sweetgrass baskets.
Yes, okay, I know that.
I love the local flavor. Love it.
Yeah, that I recognize as a pastime for them, and a side hustle for many.
Right.
But a good
Andrew
craft.
Romano in Yahoo News. What Biden's South Carolina primary win means for his 2024 chances? Well, for starters, Democrats seem to be falling in line. A full 74% of potential primary voters now say they support Biden as their 2024 nominee against Williamson, who gets 4, and Phillips, who gets 3. Why he's still in the race, I don't know.
To get 3.
I posted a picture of him for the pundit roundup and said, if you look up in the dictionary and you look up adjective hapless, he's got a picture of Dean Phillips on his bus.
I wonder sometimes what drives people to do things like that.
Somebody's paying him to do this.
I guess. Although it's funny, sometimes you wonder whether there's anybody whether somebody, an operative says, I need somebody who's not, really driven to actually become president, but I want you to run because I want you to be clobbered by the incumbent to show how strongly the party backs our incumbent. And you're going to take some knocks. People say, why are you doing this? How dare you?
Only win if you lose. It sounds like the plot from The Producers.
Yeah, maybe. Right. And you go out there and get clobbered by the incumbent and then say, golly.
Find you a job.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have one for you. You're a member of Congress. Just stop running for president before, June. And then run for your seat again.
Victoria Sparks decided she's running again. She had decided not to run, but it's Victoria Sparks from Indiana, so she always changes her mind like every week.
Okay.
Anyway, the 74% backing Biden is up from 68%, who said in December they'd vote for Biden in their state's primary or caucus. Mm-hmm. And Democratic support for Biden versus a hypothetical someone else is 11 points higher now than it was last month. Okay, less than half of potential Democratic primary voters say they want another Democrat challenged president, down from 50% and down from 54% in November. And Democrats are also increasingly likely to describe Biden as fit to serve another term as president, 64% now versus 54% in November. You'll read a whole lot about how Republicans are coalescing behind Trump. Democrats are coalescing behind Biden.
Well, that is the way these things usually go.
But you don't see that reported, so that's why it's good that he's doing this. At the same time, Democrats are 7 points more likely to say they approve of how Biden's handling the presidency. It's up to 81%. And the issue which Biden has gained the most ground since December, the economy.
All right.
So from 36 to 39 among all Americans and 69 to 79 among Democrats. And remember, that doesn't mean what you think it means, because Republicans automatically vote, no, he's terrible. What was the question?
What? How's he? What? I don't know.
He's terrible. I mean, that's my answer. What was the question?
I see. Yeah, what was it? But it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. He's terrible.
Yeah. Right. Are you again? How about this? Biden proposes doing the thing that you said you wanted to do. Answer: no. Right. Immigration bill.
Now, here's an interesting thing. One of the things that Biden did in trying to get a handle on what's going on in the Middle East, and he's doing some carefully structured hits against Iranian assets without hitting Iran. which again has everybody upset. The left is upset he's doing it at all, and the right is upset that he isn't just hitting Tehran.
Right.
Among the other things he's doing is he announced sanctions against West Bank settlers who are associated with violence. And here's a piece.
There are a lot of those.
Or at least a comment from Israel. The Biden effect, days after U.S. sanctions were announced, Israel's Bank Leumi informed the West Bank settlers accounts were frozen. So the original response was, well, what good is that? It's not going to have any effect. They don't have any money in the U.S. What do they care? Well, the banking industry is intertwined, and these banks have branches in the U.S., and they don't want to be sanctioned in the U.S. For their assets being associated with terrorism.
Yeah.
And so they're freezing the accounts in Israel. Just so
you know, that's pretty interesting. One of the other complaints was, well, I think there was a very small number who were initially sanctioned. I mean, the number can grow, but it was small.
Exactly right. I mean, it was very small, but then
tiny,
the Biden administration announced they were considering doing some of the cabinet members in Likud, specifically Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who decided not to for now.
Yeah.
So it's a message. Mm-hmm. Just like the strikes are a message. It's not designed to take out all of military assets attacking the U.S. It's a message that if you do this, you're going to open up yourself for worse.
Look, I'll take that message. It's a good one. It makes a lot of sense. So good, and there's really no reason why you should be able to travel back and forth freely or move your money back and forth freely when you're involved in that kind of targeted violence. So good. I think it was like 4 people initially hit with sanctions. But that's not zero, and the process is now there.
I mean, the point is to put down
kind of an exciting
not
concept.
To count the number of people that are going to be affected.
Right. And, you know, there aren't a whole lot of people in Israel. Honestly,
right,
you sanction everybody in Israel.
Where everybody's in the house.
They're all in the Knesset. They're not.
They're all in the Knesset. Or they have been in the Knesset, or they know somebody, or a relative has been.
That may be. In New Hampshire, even. I have a relative in New Hampshire.
Everybody in New Hampshire's been in New Hampshire's Knesset.
Right. Exactly. And okay, well, I'll take it. It's the sort of thing that, you know, now that it's been done, I've said, why weren't we doing that earlier? That seemed like a good idea.
I don't know if you are aware, but Mike Johnson has actually taken a 2-pronged approach in trying to stave off possibility of the Senate doing anything. We talked about the fact that he's trying to tell senators to vote it down so he doesn't have to deal with it. But his plan B is he's going to put a standalone $17.6 billion Israel aid package on the floor in order to try to pass that.
Weren't they? I thought he was resisting that earlier, but I don't know, maybe not.
Well, he was resisting doing it with Ukraine because that would easily pass and it's necessary.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
He's going to do it with Israel.
Okay.
However,
I see why. Okay.
It won't work because a group of House conservatives oppose it because it's not fully paid for.
Oh.
With spending cuts.
Well, he should sell one of the prongs he was thinking of using.
So it's been denounced by the Senate. It's been denounced by foreign aid and foreign policy people. It's been denounced by everybody. So that's why he's doing it, of course. But at the same time, the conservatives said, well, we're not even going to support that. It's not even a messaging bill because, we won't support it.
Oh. Well, you guys don't support anything. Could be paid for by seized assets from frozen bank accounts, although, I don't know. There's no billionaire settlers.
Right. And then finally, my last note here, Joshua Smithley, who follows Pennsylvania politics, said, it's amusing to me in many ways that Pennsylvania polls stand out in a sea of other state and national polls right now, in the sense that they're one of the few swing states that consistently show Biden up. Muhlenberg, Susquehanna, Franklin and Marshall, all of them, even QPAC, even Quinnipiac. An out-of-state pollster shows the same thing. But that's because they're all quality pollsters. Quality pollsters give you different results than
the Q is for.
Other people, and that's one of the reasons why it's interesting to follow. Just put it on the pile and look at the sites that that amalgamate everything. Well, that doesn't always work if you're putting in Trafalgar and Rasmussen polls. The thing I loved about the old polls. Huffington Post pollster is that you can check a box and just get rid of them and see what the averages really look like without them.
That's a great tool.
You're cherry picking. No, we're just getting rid of the garbage.
Or identifying garbage. Right. You can put it back in there, but as long as there's an asterisk, you can put whatever garbage you want in there, especially if the asterisk also enables you to check a box, take out the asterisk polls, and see what real pollsters are doing. That was a good tool. Is it gone? Yeah. Is that, you say the old?
Pollster doesn't exist anymore.
Okay, well then that's the answer.
Post.
Okay, I don't know. I don't know what happens at Huffington Post. The Huffington Post isn't even Huffington. It doesn't exist. It's a Huff Post. They just went down to Huff. They should make it just Huh this time.
Yeah, well, that's, she had to rename herself Ariana Huff.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't hear much about her anymore, which
Ariana
is
Huffington
terrific.
Doesn't exist anymore. That's why you don't hear about her.
Yeah, all right. She's around there somewhere, but I was never happy hearing about Ariana Huffington.
Right. Yeah, the old Groucho Marx line. She left in a huff. She should have left in a minute and a huff.
Well, okay. That brings us almost to the end of the hour there. That's pretty good news. And, okay. No more. Nothing else to squeeze in? Because there's like 1 minute before music.
Well, listen. Anthony Scaramucci predicts Trump's financial future. Avalanche about to hit this week. Thursday is the argument for the Colorado case where Trump gets thrown off.
Then I better start reading these things.
Tuesday or Friday is some of the days you can expect a decision from the circuit court, the appellate court, on immunity.
Okay.
That would be a typical time to hear
Tuesday,
Friday. And then Engoron is going to come out with a huge financial decision pretty soon too. So Scaramucci is saying, you know what? He thinks he's skated until this point. He's really nervous. He should be. The last half of this month, he's going to get clobbered.
Yeah, well, good.
Money clobbered.
Yeah, I mean, it won't come out of his pocket quite yet, but pretty soon, especially, of course, if he plans to appeal. And he almost always plans to appeal everything.
Well, he's got, Scaramucci says he's already got the E. Jean Carroll thing. Mm-hmm. Then he's got a verdict in the civil fraud trial any day now. And then he's got mounting legal bills, which are just mounting every single day. You think these, appeals are free? They ain't. They're just adding millions of dollars to the bills he has to pay. There's an avalanche about to hit him on the financial side, Scaramucci said, noting the Republican National Committee is also dealing with cash flow problems to the point where Trump on the Sunday show said, I don't know about this run of McDaniel. We'll probably need to make some changes.
Somebody else will empty out their bank account and give it to me.
Well, totally devoted to him, give him everything, and he'll throw them under the bus. He just did it again with Ronna Romney McDaniel. Probably go back to calling herself Ronna Romney McDaniel.
If he got a part of the money, Scaramucci would maybe even be that guy. I'll switch again if you pay enough. All right. Yeah. Oh, the Sunday shows were a blast this week. We didn't even get to those. All right. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. So many things to catch up on, and let's run through them. I mentioned just at the exit into the break something about the Sunday shows, which I didn't watch. And yet the news has reached me that I guess J.D. Vance put on a bit of a show and then had a bit of a show put on his face on George Stephanopoulos' This Week Sunday program on ABC. And I haven't seen the clips, but I saw them variously described as him having his microphone turned off and being kicked off the show. But I don't know. I mean, he got they gave me the reasons in 2 or 3 different reports as to what it was that he had said during the interview, and that it had ended with Stephanopoulos eventually turning off his microphone, which makes it sound like there was this big blowout and he got chucked off the air. You're too much of a liar to be on our air, but they never say anything like that, of course. And then a couple of different recaps about 2 or 3 really outrageous things that he had said, which then leads me to believe, well, how do you know he said them? The microphone was on when he said those things, and it's just sort of amazing that you can say these 3 things and, any one of them, honestly, should have been, yeah, you're too dumb, get off the air. And there were 3. So I don't know about how tough an interview it really was. But basically, he spent most of his time apparently justifying nullification, of judicial decisions that he didn't like, that it would be okay, in his view, for Republicans and states governed by Republicans to ignore the Supreme Court. I'm sure the question came up in the context of the border case recently decided in the Supreme Court, the technicalities of it being basically that the states can't block access to the federal border for federal authorities. Not that they couldn't necessarily put up more razor wire, then have it cut, then put more razor wire up after it got cut, but that it was the right of the federal authorities to access the border and do what they needed to do, including cutting that wire in order to get there. And that had engendered a whole movement last week, of Republican governors, publicly willing to sign on to a letter saying that it was okay that Texas said, oh yeah, well, we're going to defy you. Whether or not it really comes to the level of those Republican governors actually understanding what they were signing on to and being willing to do something that could cost them later, we'll have yet to see. But I guess the discussion probably started off there, and J.D. Vance defended that, saying, oh, who knows what. These decisions are terrible, even though they're made by a Supreme Court designed by you and people like you. But they're unhappy about that now, and yargle bargle. And then, but I guess it also developed into, what other things did he say? He said that there was another nullification issue that he was okay with. One of which was, he said, I guess was then pressed on at some point, and I don't know what the transition was, on the E. Jean Carroll case. What about all of these cases against Trump? I don't know whether the question was, will you be supporting him? Will you vote for him if he's convicted in these cases? I don't know exactly what the transition was, but at some point he apparently said about the E. Jean Carroll case that that doesn't count, essentially. That this was a verdict of a partisan jury in a partisan jurisdiction, and that cases were being brought against him in liberal jurisdictions, so that you would get a liberal jury, and they hate him, and on political basis they were convicting him. And so therefore it was legitimate to ignore because it was all partisan driven. But of course, you get tried in the jurisdiction where you commit the crime. He should have thought not to commit that crime at all, much less to do so in New York. But of course, as you know, he spent most of his life in New York. And so therefore a lot of his crimes were committed in New York. And what can you do? There's not that much you can do about it other than say, don't do the crime. So it's also that, plus, and here's Philip Bump just now on social media taking on the third of the infractions that J.D. Vance managed to utter on George Stephanopoulos' This Week air before finally, I guess, being cut off. He also said that had he been in the position of vice president to Donald Trump at the time, wink, wink, because that opportunity is now coming open again, I would have done that thing that you asked Mike Pence to do that he refused to do. I would have thrown out the electoral votes of states that Trump did not win. Or I think, he of course gave the most reasonable possible spin to it, I guess, saying, well, I thought that there was a lot of questions about the election, and so did a lot of other people, all of whom were wrong about this because there's no evidence that any of them were right. And I would have let Congress work it out and debate it, which is not a thing that you can do when there's no real controversy and no evidence and nobody objecting to the electoral votes of those states. It's not a thing it's just still not a thing that the vice president can do unilaterally. So it was a nonsense answer. But J.D. Vance is a nonsense guy. Here's Philip Bump looking at it in the Washington Post, I guess, just minutes ago. It was just published, and then he just went to Blue Sky and told us. This is breaking news. It is February 5th today, isn't it? Yes. So in that case, 10:03 a.m. publication time. It's 10:06 now. And if I tell you more about how amazing that is, it'll become 10:07 and it'll just look that much later. So we'll get right to it. J.D. Vance would have upended democracy over right-wing nonsense. Well, he has it right. You're not going to trip up Senator J.D. Vance by presenting him with his past disparagements of Donald Trump, Vance has spent years reframing those comments as when he said that Trump was, quote, leading our political discourse to a very negative place. His spin on that that he was wrong and Trump's presidency was great. I mean, if you're willing to say you're wrong, that's actually not the worst thing in the world, but basically that's where we are. And, it was more than, gee whiz, Donald Trump might not be a very good person or will lead us to a negative place. It was really, the discourse at the time was he'll destroy American democracy. But, golly, I was wrong about that, is what he's saying. And that's enough, of course, to get Trump to endorse him in 2022 and propel him into his current position. And now he's returning the favor. Well, anyway, back to Bump here. Well, that and a repeated willingness to embrace Trump's rhetoric, no matter how negative the place where Vance later ends up, as when he said during an interview on Sunday that he would have done exactly what Trump wanted on January 6th, 2021, and blocked electors from states that voted for Joe Biden, triggering a dangerous challenge to American democracy. Vance was speaking with ABC News' George Stephanopoulos, who seemed to be focused on testing the limits of the senator's loyalty to Trump. If there's a limit, Stephanopoulos didn't find it. He asked, for example, how he felt about Trump's having been found liable for sexually assaulting E. Jean Carroll, one of many women who have accused Trump of misconduct. Vance waved it away. I think it's actually very unfair to the victims of sexual assault to allow them their day in court, apparently. Vance said, to say that somehow their lives are being worse by electing Donald Trump for president, when what he's trying to do, I think, is restore prosperity, which has nothing to do with anything, of course. And, by the way, he has restored prosperity for E. Jean Carroll. She's going to be a very wealthy woman as soon as she gets a hold of some of that money that Trump is going to have to eventually cough up, unless, of course, we end the rule of law and democracy in this country once and for all by electing Donald Trump, which is exactly what we're talking about here, JD. But anyway, that's pretty interesting, too. It's a very unfair to victims of sexual assault because they could be enjoying prosperity if Donald Trump were president, and maybe assaulting them as well. I'm not sure that they necessarily go hand in hand, but you could have prosperity completely independent of being awarded a penalty from a jury for suing Donald Trump for sexual assault. That's not the only driver of the Trump economy. I should point that out, that Republicans believe that jobs and economic opportunity may expand for millions of Americans, even the ones Donald Trump doesn't sexually assault. So, that's the claim anyway. I do want to make clear that there's two sides to every problem, and I hate to both sides everything, but sometimes economic growth happens outside of the Donald Trump rape sector. That is true occasionally. I don't know if it's his doing necessarily, but we always say that about presidents. They don't control the economy personally, except for the part which is driven by his rape settlements, I guess. Anyway, the prospect of future economic benefit may not be the consolation for assault victims that Vance assumes, says Philip Bump. Vance also disparaged, by the way, the verdict itself, suggesting that New York is one of several, quote, extremely left-wing jurisdictions where Trump is facing charges, because that's where he does his crimes, implying that this was stacking of the deck against Trump instead of a result of his alleged crimes while he lived in those jurisdictions. Yes. The argument that a jury would rule against Trump simply because of politics, of course, is of a piece with the prevalent idea on the right that Democrats are members of a credulous hive mind. As an aside, the senator's effusive disparagement of wealthy donors bankrolling, but also bankrupting Donald Trump, thankfully. Bankrolling aggressive legal fights may not land well with his primary political patron, Peter Thiel, although all you really have to do is call Thiel up and say, I didn't mean you. I meant another guy. And that'll probably work just fine. Stephanopoulos then asked Vance about the 2020 election, Had you been vice president on January 6th, the ABC anchor asked, would you have certified the election results? And this is what Trump insisted Vice President Mike Pence not do on that day, asking Pence instead to reject electoral votes submitted by states that preferred Biden. Eventually, Vance said that's what he would have done. If I had been vice president, I would have told the states, like Pennsylvania, Georgia, and so many others, that we needed to have multiple slates of electors. And I think the U.S. Congress should have fought over it from there. In other words, he would have accepted the forged electoral certificates as real and said, we need to debate in Congress, the goddamn Congress of the United States. In both houses, we have to split up our joint session. Everybody go back and debate. Should we count the real electoral votes that show the actual result that was reported in all the newspapers and on television weeks and weeks ago? Or these fake ones on napkins that have like hand-drawn state seals on them? They don't really have them, but these things that have been forged and report the opposite result of what all of the newspapers and television said, even though there's no reason to believe that there was any fraud going on because there's been zero evidence of it, and Trump has lost 60 federal and state cases trying to prove even once that there was fraud, and they has been unable to do it. But there are two different pieces of paper here. The Congress should debate whether the ones that are signed by the governors and secretaries of state and have the state seal on them and are properly submitted and were sent to the courthouse and to the archives, et cetera, are those the real ones, or are the ones that were printed on an inkjet printer last week and, stuffed in with some cereal box tops? Are those the real ones? We should have a thoroughgoing debate on that. I mean, that's essential. That's at bottom what he was asked about, and he said that's what I would do. And then he used some highfalutin terms, I guess, to try to argue that that would have been a real thing. If I had been vice president, I would have told the states we should have, we need to have multiple slates of electors. How about 6 different ones? Why don't we debate between 6 different ideas of who won the election in each of these states and fought about it from there? And of course, what he's saying there too is, the fight that I'm saying that they should have is that all the Republicans would insist that these other electoral slates were real. The Democrats would all insist that the actual electors were the ones that should be counted. They would not be able to award anybody definitively 270 electoral votes because too many people were opting for the fake ones. And so then the House of Representatives under the constitutional order would vote by state delegation to elect a president from among the top 2 electoral vote getters. And because of the gerrymandering that gives the Republicans the advantage in terms of how many state delegations they control, they knew the outcome. They would have ended up voting for Donald Trump, and they would have said, I don't know what to tell you. That's just, it's weird and it's anti-democratic, but just like last time when he lost the popular vote by 3 million plus votes, but the Electoral College worked in his favor. This time, he also lost the popular vote, this time by twice as much, and the Electoral College didn't save him. But there's this other procedure. We just had to negate everything else that we use to try to determine who the president is in order to get us to this procedure. And then, so F the Constitution on popular vote doesn't count, doesn't have anything to say about the popular vote. F the Constitution on the electoral vote count, in which it's very specific. We're just going to go to Plan C here and just keep canceling plans until one of them elects Donald Trump. But that is very fair and constitutional, in his view. That's how we were going to do it. So this, he says, is, I think, the legitimate way to deal with an election that a lot of folks, including me, think had a lot of problems in 2020. Now, it should be said that a lot of folks, including Vance, think it had a lot of problems, but 0 courts think it did. That's interesting. And how many courts did they ask? 60 plus, and even more since then. And nobody is willing to say that on examination of actual evidence, where you actually have to weigh things fairly and establish that they're real before they're entered into evidence, never won a single moment. Not one case. So a lot of folks who are supposed to do, who are charged with the job of making serious decisions about these things, say not only is there no problem worth pointing to, but that a lot of folks like J.D. Vance are completely wrong about this. Well, anyway, it is not a legitimate way to do so at all, Philip Bump tells us, of course, particularly when considering the purported, quote, problems that Vance identified. Do I think there was a big problem? Or rather, do I think it was a problem that big technology companies, oh my God, working with the intelligence services, which they did not, censored the presidential campaign of Donald Trump? Yes, he said in another point in the interview. Do I think it's a problem that Pennsylvania changed its balloting rules in the middle of the election season in a way that even some courts in Pennsylvania have said was illegal? They did not. Yes, I think there were problems, George. Oh, Philip Bump is going to handle these things for us. Let's deal with the second one first. Pennsylvania expanded voting access to allow more mail-in ballots before 2020. Yes, but it did so in 2019, before the pandemic, with legislation passed by the Republican majority legislature. Republicans tried to challenge those changes, arguing that they violated the state constitution, and a lower court in early 2022 ruled that the changes did violate the state constitution, but that ruling was overturned by the state Supreme Court. But of course, J.D. Vance doesn't validate courts that decide against him. So that didn't count, you see. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court, in fact, had considered the question in November of 2020. Its Chief Justice, Thomas Saylor, pointed out that even if the law were unconstitutional, there has been too much good faith reliance by the electorate on the no-excuse mail-in voting regime created by the law to warrant judicial consideration of the extreme and untenable remedies proposed by the appellees, i.e. throw out everybody's votes. In other words, people had already voted by the millions under the law, so even if it shouldn't have been in place, those legal votes should not be tossed out, which is what Vance argues. Because the rules were changed over a year before the election, those voters, most of whom would probably have otherwise gone to vote against Trump in person, should have their opinions disregarded, since, that was a, quote, problem. It's one of the many problems with the election, according to Vance. Well, it's not really much of a problem, is it? The Supreme Court handled it just fine. Vance's other argument is no less contrived. He's regurgitating a common right-wing claim that the government pursued social media companies to block online information. More accurately, he's exaggerating that common claim to suggest that Trump's campaign was targeted. The short version of all this goes as follows. Elon Musk, believing rhetoric that Twitter sought to crack down on right-wing accounts and viewpoints, stumbled into buying the company. He turned over internal material to writers motivated to similarly believe that originating rhetoric, and in December of 2022, they began producing cherry-picked documents to suggest that the government told Twitter to silence right-wing voices. This included muffling coverage of Hunter Biden in October of 2020, an event that has been overhauled in the right's collective memory to have been determinative of election results. It was not. The reality of this is that the government sought the help of social media companies in halting misinformation about voting and about the coronavirus pandemic. Given that Russian hackers had been the trigger for the wide release of stolen information in 2016 in an effort to swing that election, there were also conversations about being alert to potential foreign interference efforts in 2020. When the Hunter Biden story broke only weeks before Election Day, weirdly coincidental that was, it was briefly muted out of concern that it might be a similar effort. Lawyers for Twitter have acknowledged that Vance's framing is incorrect, but consider what he's arguing, that because some Twitter accounts were muted for spreading misinformation, or, again, briefly, for sharing the Hunter Biden story, the results in several states that backed Biden should be rejected. What's more, that they should have been rejected for that reason in January of 2021, nearly 2 years before these dubious or debunked allegations were even made. How would you do that? In the future, Twitter will prove that, no, really. That's the giveaway, says Philip Bump. Vance isn't saying there were problems that necessitated reconsidering the 2020 election results, giving Trump a second term in office. What he's saying, and what Trump has done all along, is that he wishes Trump had a second term in office, which came down to the January 6th counting of electoral votes, and so he offers some after-the-fact rationalizations for why that would have been okay. It wouldn't, of course. This is intellectually dishonest and deeply problematic for democracy. If there were still any question, J.D. Vance made clear in this interview that he has willingly followed Trump into that very negative place that he once warned about. But that's what Republicans do. Okay, well, I hadn't had plans to include that in the roundup, but it came out just the right time, and so what the heck? I thought I'd throw it on the pile here. There are a couple more things that we can share, maybe one or two of these things before the break, and then I guess this really is time for us to start doing more 14th Amendment roundups ahead of the arguments later this week. All right, first up, Nancy Mace is a jerk. Everyone loves stories like that. This from the Daily Beast. Reese Gorman gets the byline in this one, but I gotta jump back to Pocket to read it. A major sign of trouble in Nancy Mace's office. Yay. What is that sign of trouble? Total staff turnover. Oh, very interesting. Why? Now, another interesting thing here. Why? Daily Beast is particularly susceptible to this misattribution in the Pocket version. But no matter, we did get, before the paywall came up, the correct attribution. And so the story here, as reported, add another ignoble credential to Representative Nancy Mace's resume. What is it? As of Monday, according to 3 sources familiar with the matter, Mace's entire D.C. staff has turned over since November 1st, 2023. Wow, that's what? November, December, January. 3 months and the whole staff is gone. And I assume that they were replacement staff from before. Okay. That's 9 staffers in the span of a few short months, with all but one of those employees leaving on their own accord. Not hard to understand, of course. I mean, she's really reversed herself on so many things and turned into such a completely different type of person that it's hard to believe that anybody who went to work for the earlier version of her would be interested in working for this version. Anyway, the lone exception to those 8 staffers who left Mace's office on their own accord is now former Chief of Staff Dan Hanlon, who was fired on December 1st. Hanlon has subsequently filed to run against Mace in her South Carolina district. That is exciting. As for the rest of her former staff, they all quit. That includes her Deputy Chief of Staff, Richard Chalky, her Legislative Director, Randall Meyer, Communications Director, Will Hampson, a financial advisor, a staff assistant, 2 legislative assistants, and her military legislative assistant. I guess those guys don't warrant name recognition, I guess, for some. I mean, those are the lower level staffers too. And honestly, it's probably best if they don't, because you're talking about operating at a level where if your name is attached to it and you leave and you're looking for more work on Capitol Hill, it's better for you just to be able to move on to something else. The big name, Chief of Staff, Deputy Chief of Staff, etc., name brands, etc. I guess you can't really escape it, but it's probably better for the lower level folks just to be able to move on and get a different job. Bad enough that Nancy Mace is on your resume. No need to put your name in the papers. Although, yeah, sometimes you wonder, well, yeah, am I not just as important? My resignation was supposed to be meaningful too. It is. We get the message. It's just probably best for you if your name is not in the paper. Okay, so what were we talking about? Let's see. Oh, and from what the departed staffers told the Daily Beast, there was good reason to leave. Former Mace employees described a toxic work environment. And remember, I guess it's, again, another good reason not to have your name attached to it. You're looking for more work. One, you don't want to be dropping resumes in a new office and then being asked, so what happened with your last position? And saying, well, it was a toxic work environment, because very often, I don't know, new employers, or the next employer, I guess, might look askance on that and say, is that the case? Or are we talking about a problem employee? Now, in this case, they'll be able to know, well, Nancy Mace's office, I think that actually was a toxic work environment, because there's we hear a lot about that. And the whole staff left. That's one thing. But for another, remember, you're applying probably in other Republican offices too. Although, who knows? Maybe they're ready to switch parties. But applying in a Republican office, that's like coming in with your pronouns up at the top of the resume. Toxic work environment. We don't believe in such things. That's one of those liberal things that people complain about. So I don't know whether that's going to avail them of anything. But I guess it's good to have the report like this and say, no, even the papers say it's a toxic work environment. But in response to questions about the dramatic turnover, Mace's new chief of staff, Lori Khatod, Khatod, I guess, presented the complete turnover as a non-issue. New coach, new team in the D.C. office, Khatod said in a text message. Former staffers who spoke with the Daily Beast on condition of anonymity, however, told a very different story. See, lots of anonymity at every level for these folks. Good idea.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
Okay, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's conclude with the Nancy Mace story, move on to the various other things I have in store for you. So, in speaking with the Daily Beast, lots of former staffers from Nancy Mace on condition of anonymity were telling their stories. One former senior staffer, I guess unnamed here, even though at least two of the senior staff were named earlier in the story, says the member was abusive. That it occurs to me that's, you probably all figured out what that means. The member was abusive, but not everybody speaks that lingo. On Capitol Hill, the Hill, as they like to call it, just like that trade rag newspaper we refer to all the time calls itself the Hill. They mean Capitol Hill. And not everybody, I don't know, somehow that doesn't ring a bell with everybody. But the member is the member of Congress who I was working for. On the Senate side, they just say the senator. But that's the catch-all, non-gendered term, the member. And it's a little bit awkward and it's unusual and weird and a little insular. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Everybody knows that Nancy Mace is a member of Congress, but we usually refer to her as representative. They don't say the representative was abusive. That's just trade lingo. So the member was abusive, one former senior staffer told the Daily Beast, specifically pointing to the frequency with which Mace would communicate with her staff, either over text, Signal, or Monday.com, which is an unauthorized software system that Mace uses in her office, which is interesting, and we'll need to know that for subpoena purposes later on when they want to get a hold of her messages. This former staffer said Mace uses the software to micromanage the office all day and into the night and early morning. It was constant, this person said. Another senior staffer recalled how Mace called them close to midnight on Christmas Eve, potentially jeopardizing their ability to receive gifts from Santa Claus, by the way. I should point that out. If I understand Christian theology correctly. I know it's not actually Christian theology. Gil, don't worry about it. I actually know the difference there. But okay, it doesn't matter. Called them close to midnight on Christmas Eve and demanded to know why she wasn't getting on TV more during the holiday week. And the answer is that she was not returning to her hometown and saving the local small businesses. That's the way to get on TV in Christmas week. You're supposed to do that, and they make a movie about it. That's how I understood the operation to work. If she needed us, we had to answer within 8 minutes, this staffer said, clarifying that the 8-minute time frame was actually a rule. Nancy is delusional as a boss, the former staffer continued. She says nothing publicly without her consultants or senior staffers telling her to, but takes credit for everything. That's actually just regular staff structure. But she's a walking teleprompter. Well, if she was, then she would know what to say. But never mind. The former staffer added that Mace, quote, has no idea what it actually means to be a member of Congress and is too scared and self-conscious to deal with other people, so she accomplished nothing. All this is why pretty much every staffer and fellow member on the Hill thinks she's a joke. This ex-employee said, also a big reason why she's only able to hire former George Santos staffers right now. Oh, is that where they're coming from? Okay. Mace recently hired Santos's former communications director to serve her office in that role. She didn't even get an advancement. Wow. More broadly, these staffers described Mace's office as grueling and thankless, although that's honestly probably true for 90% plus of members' offices on either side, honestly. Not, and I don't mean just partisan sides. I mean Senate side and House side. She created a demoralizing environment for staff, as one of her other former senior employees put it. Multiple former employees specifically complained about Mace's propensity to ensure everyone was working all the time, even on Good Friday. Good Friday. When some staff just wanted to take an hour off to go to Mass in the late afternoon, Mace, not Mass, but Mace, wouldn't have it. Two former senior staffers said the House was adjourned at the time. Now, I'm familiar with problems like that. Look, the Capitol Hill is a terrible place to work. This is excessive, and there are definitely some members' offices that are much worse than others. And I've never heard of, the 8-minute rule, but certainly I would imagine there's probably plenty of offices where the chief of staff and the communications director, there might be certain demands on them. You need to be available to me at all times. You never know when news is going to happen. But here, even news wasn't even happening. She was actually just calling them to complain about why I'm not in the news right now. But yeah, most members are just not great to their staff, period. And I'm certainly familiar with the idea of, well, you can't get time off to go to Mass on Good Friday, although it's not the good look, and people don't like to be reported in the paper that sort of thing is happening. But the fact that the House was adjourned at the time, that never matters to members. They don't care about that. They want people there all the time. I've had that experience myself. Anyway, for Mace, it was all about control. One of the previously mentioned former staffers said she didn't see the staff as people, but as property. And, in South Carolina, that's problematic. I mean, we view it as problematic. In South Carolina, that's just history, I guess. A more recent demoralizing incident was when the new chief of staff, Katod, however that's pronounced, tried to send the D.C. employees home early one day in early December. For the staff that hung back, they were treated to a bizarre show. I mean, why didn't you just go? It turns out that Katod had called the Capitol Police on Hanlon, who had been fired just days before. Politico, which first wrote on the incident, reported that Hanlon had been in the office earlier to return his keys, but it wasn't clear to these staffers who talked to the Daily Beast whether Hanlon was actually on Capitol Hill at the time of the call. When Katod came back to the office and realized not all the staff had left as she instructed, she didn't hide her displeasure, according to two sources familiar with the matter. I don't think I understand this incident at all. Staffers had no idea why Katod had called the Capitol Police on Hanlon. Could have been over Hanlon taking an office popcorn machine on his way out. Okay, but many former employees were disturbed by the incident. I'm not even going to bother. That's linked. You can click on that on your own time. I mean, I would happily do it, but there's other stuff to get, maybe I'll even open it up just so I have it later. Well, go back to the popcorn machine story. At that moment, I felt the most unsafe I ever had on the Hill when I realized she was using the Capitol Police to intimidate staff. One witness to the event told the Daily Beast, this is really not clear what's happening. The incident quickly spread within the office and left many other staffers feeling rattled and uncomfortable, two sources said. It was that moment which cemented in some of their minds that they were going to quit. Mace's office would not delve into specifics about the Capitol Police incident or the intense work demands. Like most offices, we do not discuss internal processes, Katad said in a statement in response to these specific allegations. We adhere and accommodate employees, whose sincerely held religious beliefs, practices, or observances conflict with regular work requirements. This, of course, isn't the first time Mace has faced criticism from ex-employees. One of her former staffers, who previously served as her communications director, has been on a crusade to detail Mace's self-serving ways, linked herein if you want to see what they are. And one woman who ran into Mace in the airport recently reportedly overheard her screaming at a staff member, telling this person to clean up press reports that her office was toxic. We need a toxic cleanup. She's a super fun site. Now, while Mace's new office can dispute her former staff's characterization of the work culture, what the Congresswoman can't dispute is the numbers. Professor Casey Burgett, the Legislative Affairs Program Director at George Washington University, told Daily Beast that disproportionately high turnover signals that staff are incredibly unhappy. It's a ridiculously high number, just out of the ordinary, said Burgett, who has studied congressional staff turnover patterns and has testified before Congress on some of his findings. I would be shocked if you found any other representative or senator with even close to that high of a turnover in such a short amount of time. A Mace staff handbook, previously obtained by the Daily Beast, detailed how her staff was required to book her on a national TV outlet between 1 and 3 times per day, and how each staffer had to come up with draft tweets for the Congresswoman. I would say, my experience again on Capitol Hill, horribly outdated, but if a member, backbench, first, second, third term member of the House is on TV once a week, it's astonishing. National TV, I would say once a month is a pretty good rate for just a regular backbencher. Local TV, you can hope for more, but time on a national TV outlet, 1 to 3 times per day, not happening. Not even for the leadership, quite honestly. According to the handbook, Mace also held her staff to the standard of passing 10 bills in the House floor every year. And as you know, the House isn't passing anything at all. So if 10 of them were your bills, that would be amazing as well. And no, that never happens for freshman members either. It would be an incredible clip for a backbench member and filing 25 new bills. That they can do. You can file all you want. During her 3 years in office, Mace has had 1 bill signed into law. That too is that's actually not a bad record. A measure renaming a post office on Hilton Head Island. And yeah, that's about the size of what new members get. Okay. Well, anyway, that I just thought was interesting because we've been on the subject of Nancy Mace before. So filling in some additional blanks there. Speaking of yelling at people in airports, I just wanted to share this story, which was circulated yesterday on social media. Politico reporting that Ted Cruz wants lawmakers to get security escorts through America's airports. That's the headline. Subheader says Cruz told Politico that his amendment is about ensuring that political VIPs aren't endangered as they pass through public spaces in airports. I know he's been on about this for a while now, and I guess it probably all stems from when he was caught running away to Cancun during one of the deep freezes affecting Texas, where they lost the ability to provide everybody with power. So people were freezing in their homes, and he decided it was time to go to Mexico, and that was super embarrassing for him. But I guess he had been spotted getting on the flight. And if people hadn't spotted him getting on the flight, they wouldn't have known he was in Cancun, and he could have stayed there. That's the issue. Oriana Pollock is the reporter for Politico on this one. Viral photos of politicians jetting off to a tropical hideaway during a deadly cold wave might become a lot rarer under legislation being pushed by Senator Ted Cruz. Again, you know the background of all of this. I don't know. I'm curious to see whether he's got any justification for this besides I don't want people knowing I'm going on vacation. But let's see. The measure would also provide the same special treatment to federal judges and cabinet members, as well as a limited number of their family and staff. And I think, the paragraph I skipped, tells us the bill amendment would offer lawmakers a dedicated security escort at airports, which means people who, I guess, have to sit around waiting for VIPs to come to their airports. At Washington National and Dulles airports, perhaps that makes some sense. But otherwise, how many airports around the country do we have to have people sitting around waiting to escort members of Congress and other VIPs? Anyway, escort them through the airports along with expedited screening outside of public view. So you get through security faster because you're a VIP, but it also happens outside of public view so no one can see you cutting the line, I guess. But, safety, security, yada, yada, blah, blah. So they want to be able to move faster through the airports and not have anybody be able to stop them or bother them or say, you suck or I'm not voting for you on the way back and forth on their travels. So whatever. They want to be all the perks of flying private, but, applied to regular commercial flights. What struck me really about this story, and I don't know if I want to spend any more time on it, although I probably will read through it just to see if there's anything else funny later on off the air. But what struck me was he wants a security escort through the airports, which is amazing given that, like, the Republican position now on January 6th, where they were there to murder members of Congress or tie their hands with zip ties and drag them outside and at least present them to the gallows and maybe sort of kind of hang several of them as well. And then later to dismiss this whole Capitol insurrection as, remember when Republicans were saying, these are just tourists. Why are we afraid of them? They're just tourists. Well, if you're on your way through the airports, those literally are tourists. And now Ted Cruz is afraid of real tourists and not afraid of insurrectionist tourists because, of course, they were on his side. But remember, by the way, briefly, there is videotape of people rifling through Ted Cruz's desk and papers on January 6th and declaring him on the incorrect reading of what they were finding in his desk as being a traitor, and that maybe he should get rounded up and hanged too. Before somebody apparently decoded the thing and said, no, actually, this is him saying that he's actually kind of is on our side. Oh, too late. We hanged him. Well, anyway, just wanted to point that out, right? When people are carrying out a coup on behalf of Donald Trump, they're just tourists. And when people are just tourists, those are actually the people carrying out a coup. Just, they've come full circle on that one and reversed everything. It's not that they just think everybody's a tourist. They think the tourists are terrorists and the terrorists are tourists. And, the spelling is close, right? Both start with T, they end in IST, but that's because we've forced these suffixes on them. But hey, never mind all of that. Just wanted to point that out. Ted Cruz is a super jerk and a real weirdo. And that's it. Okay, so I promised that there was more information being circulated on 14th Amendment arguments, which will be coming up later in this week before the Supreme Court. And honestly, I'm surprised that this didn't come up on Greg's list because it's E.J. Dionne writing about it. But there are so many things that we had to cover that he knew he could leave it to me. And this one I want to read, not because it's revelatory in any way, although it does document a change of mind for Dionne, which is an interesting thing. And you can see what might change other people's minds as a result if you think that they think like E.J. Dionne. But also it's a good piece because it links to like 3 or 4 different amicus briefs making different points that he found persuasive. So I thought this would be a pretty good tool. Plus, it's always good to read E.J. Dionne because, I don't know, it makes me feel like I have a suit on when we talk. Why I changed my mind and think Trump should be thrown off the ballot. I like the way your mind changed on this one, EJ. And here's how it goes. It is annoying when your political judgments come into conflict with what you decide is right. Now, I can agree with that. Everyone feels that. That's what happened to me on the question of whether Donald Trump should be barred from running for president under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. You know this already, but the section disqualifies from office those who took an oath to support the Constitution and then engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or gave aid and comfort to the enemies thereof. When a narrowly divided Colorado Supreme Court threw Trump off the state's primary ballot in December on the basis of Section 3's plain language, my initial reaction was, well, political and skeptical. Though I agreed that Trump had indeed engaged in insurrection, thank you, I thought it would be best for the country, it wouldn't, to have him go down to defeat again in a free and fair election, as if we were going to have one of those. Keeping him on the ballot so voters could decide was the path to long-term institutional stability and might finally force a reckoning in the Republican Party. No, it won't, but okay. Many people I respect continue to hold versions of this view, and they should not. But the more I read and listened, the clearer it became that Section 3 was directed against precisely the conduct Trump engaged in. I mean, that was obvious from the beginning, but I guess it took you a while. Its purpose is to protect the Republic from those who would shred the Constitution, yes, and destroy our system of self-government. What Trump did in advance of the attack on the Capitol and on January 6th legally disqualifies him from the presidency. The record is clear that the legislators who wrote and enacted the amendment in the wake of the Civil War, thanks historians, were not just thinking of the Confederacy's leaders, but also of the leaders of any rebellion hereafter to come. And that is a quote pulled from the congressional debates. Those are the words of John B. Henderson, a Republican senator from Missouri, when he cast his vote for the amendment in 1866. They are recorded in a powerful amicus brief filed with the Supreme Court by a distinguished group of historians of the era, Jill Lepore, David Blight, Drew Gilpin Faust, and John Fabian Witt. And I don't know whether this is the amicus brief that Greg told us about last week or a different one, because there are several. The amendment's authors, they argue, hoped not only to prevent a resurgence of secessionism, but also, and we're seeing that recurring now, all the same rhetoric over the border issue and all the different Republican governors signing on saying that they support Texas's idea that they should be able to nullify the Supreme Court decisions, and J.D. Vance's appearance on the Sunday talk shows with George Stephanopoulos. Same thing. So here we are again. The amendment's authors, the amicus brief writers argue, hoped not only to prevent a resurgence of secessionism, but also to protect future generations against insurrectionism. A little too late for that one, but we can prevent the next round of it, I hope. It was intended to bar anyone who has betrayed an oath to uphold the Constitution from becoming President of the United States. Quote, right? They back up these assertions with a compelling 34-page account of what the framers of the amendment intended and why they wrote it as they did. The essay should encourage conservatives on the Supreme Court, which hears the case on Thursday, to ponder words they love, originalism and textualism. Other historically minded briefs made it harder for me to stick with my earlier prudent view. Was it prudent? It really wasn't. But you probably felt like you were being prudent. A group of 25 historians, including James McPherson, the Civil War's premier chronicler, and Nell Irvin Painter, a specialist in Black and Southern history, cite the congressional debate on Section 3 to show that it plainly applies to the office of the president. I guess this is a different group of historians and another amicus brief. They offer clear evidence that implementing the section did not require additional acts of Congress, as some defenders of Trump claim. Sherilyn Ifill, a Howard Law School professor and former president of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, shows how the clause to disqualify insurrectionists is closely linked to the 14th Amendment's core purpose. Quote, a bold and expansive promise of citizenship for black people, unquote. Its framers were preoccupied with the, quote again, ongoing resistance to full black citizenship by southern states, unquote, and feared that, quote, black men who had been loyal to the Union would be disenfranchised while disloyal white former Confederates would be rewarded with the vote, unquote. Trump is a present-day embodiment of those fears, she wrote, having offered, quote, a false narrative discrediting the votes cast in jurisdictions with high concentrations of black voters, unquote, including Detroit, Philadelphia, and Atlanta, and to argue that barring Trump from the ballot is anti-democratic, wrote Professors Carol Anderson and Ian Farrell in another brief, is ironic, as he bears by far the most responsibility for attempting to subvert democracy on January 6th. An effort to overthrow constitutional procedures, wrote Eiffel, should be distinguished from political protests, even those accompanied by sporadic acts of violence. Demonstrators are not the same as a mob trying to hijack the government. These are paradoxes. In my correction, I got it wrong. There are paradoxes galore on this matter. Believing Trump should be unable to run, for example, is the opposite of a partisan wish, since he is, without question, the weakest Republican whom President Biden could face. So for those of you who think it's partisan and unfair to keep him off the ballot, well, it's not partisan. It's the opposite of partisan, as he argues it, because any other Republican candidate would probably fare better at the polls. You just don't want to acknowledge that. Okay, fine. We'll have to force you, I guess. Another of the contradictions and paradoxes, even if Colorado was right to block Trump from the ballot, it shouldn't be allowed to do so on states' rights grounds alone. This is a national question, and the court, SCOTUS that is, should not duck the fundamental issues at stake, though my hunch is that they might look for a way to punt. The biggest paradox of all, throwing Trump off the ballot would seem on its face the opposite of democracy. Yet, the whole point of Section 3 is to protect constitutional democracy from anyone who has already tried to destroy it. If its provisions don't apply to Trump, they don't apply to anyone. The court would not be disqualifying him. He disqualified himself. And there, I think he reaches the same conclusion as a lot of us, and I'm glad he's there, and it was interesting to see how we get around to it, but, glad to have it on record. There's another piece just in, is it today's Washington Post, also on the same subject, and we might as well use our few remaining minutes to read through this one, an opinion piece by Jason Willick, with whom I am less familiar, but one of the Post's columnists. I don't know why we don't see his name come up on our show all that often, but I guess we'll find out. The anti-slavery giant at the center of the Trump disqualification case. Let's find out who we're talking about here and see what we can learn in a few minutes. When the Supreme Court hears arguments on Thursdays on Colorado's removal of Donald Trump from the state's primary ballot for insurrection under the 14th Amendment, all eyes will be on the 17th Chief Justice of the United States, John G. Roberts, Jr. But the case Trump versus Anderson also puts the country's 6th Chief Justice, Salmon P. Chase, in the judicial spotlight. Whatever happens, Chase's unlikely moment of prominence contains a historical lesson about the link between law and politics. Those following the Trump disqualification case closely know that Chase, appointed to the Supreme Court by Abraham Lincoln in 1864, wrote the main judicial opinion on the 14th Amendment's disqualification clause. Ratified in 1868, the amendment barred office holders who engaged in insurrection from future office. Chase, as a lone justice riding circuit, ruled in an 1869 opinion known as Griffin's case that it would be infeasible to determine what particular individuals are embraced by the disqualification clause without a legal process prescribed by Congress. The next year, Congress passed legislation creating such a process. Fast forward to 2024, there is a campaign to disqualify Trump from the presidency on the grounds that on January 6th, the Capitol riot was an insurrection. Congress has said that those convicted of insurrection are disqualified from office under the 14th Amendment, but the Justice Department hasn't even charged Trump with that crime. Trump's opponents argue that states can or must remove him from ballots anyway, as Colorado has done. Lincoln's Chief Justice is standing in the way. For the disqualification campaign to succeed, Trump's opponents must overcome Chase's seminal 1869 Griffin opinion. If Chase was a reliable authority on the 14th Amendment, then the activist end run around convicting Trump with insurrection is dubious at best. It takes some audacity to so confidently dismiss Chase's reading of what the 14th Amendment required in 1868. After all, he was there. Yet that's precisely what activists and academics are doing. The law review article by Professors William Baud and Michael Stokes Paulson that turbocharged the disqualification campaign against Trump calls Chase's view appalling and says it should be hooted down from the pages of history, a reference to the infamous 1857 Supreme Court opinion in Dred Scott v. Sanford. All right, you know what? Well, it looks like we were running up against our time limits a little sooner than I anticipated. I thought I would get further into this article, but now I'd like to give some further consideration to this one anyway, and it's not clear where Jason Willick is coming out on this one. This too, like most things, involves a lot of historical flip-flops and contradictions along the way, but wanted to alert you to the fact that this one was out there anyway. There are many more articles out there covering the various amicus briefs. I don't think we'll really have time to read through the amicus briefs themselves, although the one from the historians that's getting the most attention seems like a worthwhile read. However, time for today to give the microphone up and turn to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, coming up next, right here on Netroots Radio, and I can give you a preview of what's happening in the seconds we have left over our music bed here. Let's see. Mike Johnson's claims about the border bill is just a lie. We'll have to figure out what that one's about. Although the fact that Mike Johnson is just a liar, well, that's easy to understand. Rest of the menu for the day. The governor of Pennsylvania is set to deliver a second budget while seeking more money for higher education, and public transit. The largest tribe in South Dakota, heard about this one, has barred the state's governor from its lands after her speech about unauthorized immigration harming reservations. Well, I guess they don't think so.
NetrootsRadio.com.
Although they do probably think our immigration was not a great idea.
In the morning with David Waldman.
All right, well, there's more, of course. Federal judges are setting the record straight over claims that the January 6th insurgents are political prisoners. And I guess internationally, let's see, a Boston man has been extradited from Sweden to face obstruction charges in arson cases targeting Jewish organizations. Let's straighten that one out on the next